If you've been listening to this show for a while, you know that I have been a longtime skeptic of the pharmaceutical industry. Now, of course, pretty much everyone claims to be a skeptic of the pharmaceutical industry. People on the left are predisposed, you would think anyway, to hate big pharma because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, which you can put the word big in front of, and that means that it's evil. Many people on the right have become even more critical of big pharma in the last few years, especially because of how it has pushed the COVID vaccines. A push that now, by the way, as of a few weeks ago, officially includes children as young as 6 months old. So if you want to bring your baby in for a COVID vaccine, you can now do that, though I certainly wouldn't recommend it. And yet, a large preponderance of both groups, even while usually assuming a kind of skeptical posture towards this industry, will let big pharma entirely off the hook when it comes to psychiatric drugs. As of 2021, nearly 65 million Americans had been prescribed at least one psychiatric drug. Think about that for a second. 65 million Americans. Just 5 years before that, the number was 40 million. 40 million was already sky high. In 5 years, it's gone up over 20 million. 20% of the country is on medication for mental illness, and that number is climbing by multiple percentage points every year. Meanwhile, our health authorities, our so-called health authorities, tell us that the real crisis is untreated, read non-drugged, unprescribed mental illness. So they see the 65 million Americans on psychotropic drugs for mental illness, and they insist that the number is far too low. We actually needed to get it much higher. Should be 100 million, should be 150. It should be everybody. And I'm not joking about that either, because the DSM expands, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders expands with each new edition until every single human emotion, personality trait, proclivity, impulse has become a mental illness. And we're already at the point with the latest DSM where you can open it up and find probably at least 5 or 10 mental illnesses that would apply to you. So the health establishment, the medical establishment, they demand that more and more mentally ill, quote unquote, people, most of them suffering from things like depression or anxiety or ADHD, be identified and drugged immediately. Never mind the significant and often dangerous side effects of these drugs. Never mind that we're altering people's brains en masse. Never mind that we're diagnosing conditions that we barely understand and drugging them based on poorly supported and sometimes demonstrably false medical theories. Never mind all that. Just keep the drugs, and most importantly, the money flowing. This is what big pharma, along with doctors and psychiatrists, have been doing. And many people on both the left and right, who are normally quite eager to criticize the medical establishment, fall silent, as that same medical establishment declares millions upon millions of Americans mentally ill, so mentally ill that they need psychotropic drugs in order to function. On this point, many of big pharma critics are willing to simply take big pharma's word for it. Well, they say we're all mentally ill, so I guess we are. They might lie about everything else, these selective critics will say, but they would never lie about the best treatment for depression. They would never lie about that. Quite an odd claim when you think about it. And on the subject of depression, the, quote, mental illness that accounts for a large portion of that 65 million figure, it's been taken as gospel for many years that drugs are necessary to treat it because the condition is caused by a, quote unquote, chemical imbalance in the brain. This is an idea that people have absorbed from the culture and especially from propaganda from the drug companies. You know, this didn't end up out there by accident. This is what the drug companies want you to believe. It's a chemical imbalance, so we'll give you a little chemical in a pill and we'll fix it right up for you. And it's a doctrine that is jealously guarded and defended. I know from experience that if you question it, if you dare suggest that maybe there's more to it than a chemical imbalance, you will be viciously attacked for your heresy. People like the chemical imbalance idea because it seems simple. And because it totally absolves the individual from the responsibility to do anything to help solve their own mental troubles. It takes things like, lifestyle, diet, etc., takes that out of the equation entirely. It gives a simple cause, promises a simple solution, and one that requires almost no work on the part of the individual. Just take the pill, that's it. Take the pill and everything will be better. That's Big Pharma's motto. Take the pill, take the shot, everything will be fine. You solve your depression with a magic pill. Big Pharma makes billions, win-win for everybody, right? Well, wrong. The problem with the chemical imbalance idea, the one that has led to millions of people being put on psychiatric drugs, the one that has put billions and billions, hundreds of billions into the pockets of Big Pharma, the problem with that idea is that there was never any evidence to support it. It's a marketing slogan. It's not a medical diagnosis. And a study that was just released this week, this is a truly, I don't use this phrase very often in a non-ironic way, but it is a bombshell study. Reported by The Guardian, finally blows the lid off of the whole scam. Here's the headline. Little evidence that chemical imbalance causes depression, UCL scientists find. Reading now from the study, it says, scientists have called into question the widespread use of antidepressants after a major review found no clear evidence that low serotonin levels are responsible for depression. Prescriptions for antidepressants have risen dramatically since the 1990s, with 1 in 6 adults and 2% of teenagers in England now being prescribed them. Millions more people around the world regularly use antidepressants. Quote, many people take antidepressants because they've been led to believe their depression has a biochemical cause, but this new research suggests that this belief is not grounded in evidence. This according to the study's lead author, Joanne Moncrief, a professor of psychiatry at University College London and consultant psychiatrist at Northeast London NHS Foundation Trust. Quote, it is always difficult to prove a negative, but I think we can safely say that after a vast amount of research conducted over several decades, there is no convincing evidence that depression is caused by serotonin abnormalities, particularly by lower levels or reduced activity of serotonin. Thousands of people suffer from side effects of antidepressants, including the severe withdrawal effects that can occur when people try to stop taking them, yet prescription rates continue to rise. We believe this situation has been driven partly by the false belief that depression is due to a chemical imbalance. It is high time to inform the public that this belief is not grounded in science. So it would seem that Big Pharma has made billions of dollars fixing a problem that does not exist. Depression certainly exists, don't get me wrong, but depression caused by a chemical imbalance is a myth. And it is a mythical creation that the antidepressants are meant to fix. It's something the pharmaceutical companies have made up, a problem they made up and then gave us the cure for. Reading more from this report, which is just more and more damning for the pharmaceutical industry as you go along, it says, in the new analysis, researchers said 85 to 90% of the public believes depression is caused by low serotonin or a chemical imbalance. Most antidepressants are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, originally said to work by correcting abnormally low serotonin levels. The review published in the journal Molecular Psychiatry looked at studies examining serotonin and depression involving tens of thousands of people. One of the findings was that research comparing levels of serotonin and its breakdown products in the blood or brain fluids did not discover any difference between people diagnosed with depression and healthy people. The authors also looked at studies where serotonin levels were artificially lowered in hundreds of people and concluded that lowering serotonin in this way did not produce depression in hundreds of healthy volunteers. Other studies looked at the effects of stressful life events and found that the more stressful life events a person has experienced, the more likely they were to be depressed, showing the importance of external events. Who would have thought? Apparently external events, the things that happen to us in our lives, the events that we're a part of, the things that we suffer from, the things that we encounter, like all of that, your everyday life, these have a deep and lasting effect on our moods and our emotions and our mental states. Now, of course, even with this study, or rather without this study debunking the chemical imbalance theory, which was never really a theory actually, but more of an unproven and arbitrary guess. But before the study was even published, it was already obvious that the chemical imbalance idea made no sense. For one thing, in order to diagnose an imbalance, we must first have some idea of what the correct balance is supposed to be. And yet none, I would wager to say, none of the 90% of the public who believes in the chemical imbalance can articulately explain what sort of balance we're supposed to have in our brains. Oh, there's a chemical imbalance. Oh, really? Well, so what is our balance supposed to be exactly? What's like the ideal balance? Well, I don't know. I just know that it's imbalanced. And even if we did know what sort of balance we're supposed to have, how exactly do they diagnose the imbalance? I mean, do they diagnose it at all? Out of all the millions of people prescribed antidepressants, were any of them given a brain scan or a blood test or any other sort of physical medical test to confirm that this imbalance existed before it was treated? Like, these are drugs that are supposed to treat a physical problem. Did they ever do anything to confirm the existence of the physical problem inside the individual before giving them the drugs for it? No, never. Well, that's odd. If depression is simply biochemical in origin, then why isn't it diagnosed on a biochemical basis? If it's a simple physical ailment, why isn't it confirmed physically before being treated as if it's simply physical? These are the kinds of questions we could have been asking all along, but hardly anyone ever did. I want to read one last part of this report because it's important. It says, according to the research, there is also evidence from other studies that antidepressants may actually induce low serotonin in the long term. It may actually create the problem it's supposed to fix. Quote, our view is that patients should not be told that depression is caused by low serotonin or by a chemical imbalance, and they should not be led to believe that antidepressants work by targeting these unproven abnormalities. Quote, we do not understand what antidepressants are doing to the brain exactly, and giving people this sort of misinformation prevents them from making an informed decision about whether to take antidepressants or not. They don't understand exactly what these drugs are doing to the body, but they prescribe them anyway. That's another thing that I've been saying for years. The people giving these drugs out don't actually know exactly what they do, because the human brain's a complicated place. Putting people on drugs, putting things into people's bodies without really knowing what it's going to do. There seems to be a lot of that sort of thing going around these days. A lot of it. And this sort of half-blind approach is particularly terrifying as it relates to the brain. Because the brain, again, is still a mystery to us in many ways. And yet drug companies are tinkering with it, messing with our minds, without really knowing whether what they're doing will work, or how it's working, if it does work, or what the long-term or even short-term effects will be. One of the side effects of many psychiatric drugs is suicidal thoughts, which is morbidly ironic because, again, that's the problem that they're supposed to help treat. And yet they can cause that problem, apparently. So these are drugs which, according to the companies that produce them, may cause you to think certain thoughts. They may put thoughts into your head. Self-destructive, dangerous thoughts. That fact alone should give us pause. Now, does this mean that there is no physical aspect to depression? Of course not. I mean, we're physical beings. Our brains are physical. There's going to be a significant physical element to the problem. I mean, to any problem that we suffer from, including mental problems, by definition, but it's also multifaceted and complicated. Depression is a feeling of emptiness, despair, hopelessness, meaninglessness. If a person is feeling that way, it's almost always impossible to discern one simple cause. That's what the drug companies sell. One simple cause, but it's never that simple. There are internal and external factors, all tracing back to the universal human condition, the fact that we are mortal beings living in a world of constant pain and suffering and death and misery, with lots of aimlessness and boredom in between. The depressed person is not crazy or sick because they recognize this fact about life. In fact, here's the point that we always miss in this discussion. There are a lot, actually, of very good reasons to feel pretty bad living as just a human being in the world. The world can be a really tough place. Doesn't mean that we should feel bad. Doesn't mean that if someone does feel bad, we should just leave them to their misery. But the point is that these feelings are not crazy. They're not delusional. There are reasons for them. And person who's overcome with these feelings, their problem is that they are not able to sufficiently cope with our condition as human beings in this world. They're not able to find meaning and hope and joy in spite of all the terrible things that come with being a human being in the world. The way to treat the depression is to help them cope, which will involve everything from better lifestyle choices to diet and exercise, getting outside on a sunny day and taking a walk, like things like that, even really, really simple things. It's not the be-all and end-all, but things like that. In some cases, there may still be need for drugs temporarily, but they're going to be a Band-Aid, not a cure. You can't cure despair with a pill, despite what the drug companies have told us. And the drug companies have told us a lot of lies. They have, especially recently. And it's quite a statement, but this might be the biggest one yet. Well, if you enjoyed that video, be sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to get more content like it. If you're craving more content. Go watch or listen to my full show at dailywire.com, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.